I'm Chad Ruthermond.
And I'm Andy Kinnick.
And welcome to NOCLIP Pocket. Kill the monsters, steal the treasure, stab your buddy. And today, we're going to be talking about Sorcery! Exclamation point. Steve Jackson's Sorcery, to be incredibly specific.
Parts 1 and 2.
Yes. Which was developed by Inkle, published by them, and was released in May 2nd, 2013 for this version, but the series has been ongoing and has its most recent release in September 22nd, 2016. It was released on iOS, Android, Windows, and OS X. There are a couple of things about that I feel like I want to talk about.
Yep.
So, this game itself, because we should say this first, I suppose, is a tabletop RPG simulator, sort of, kind of.
Yeah, it's really hard to describe to somebody who doesn't know what it is.
Yeah.
But once you see it, I think you get it immediately.
Yeah. It is effectively a text-based adventure game that has visuals. They've been painted over it, but they don't really... You don't control a character, so to speak, and you don't do much of what you do in traditional adventure games. It's more you responding and reacting to what the game is narrating to you.
Yeah, it almost kind of feels like a magical board game. You're moving a piece on a board, and then, an invisible, unseen DM, basically, that you can think of it that way, is describing everything to you that happens on the map.
It's kind of like a Jumanji.
Sure.
Like a magical board game. It's like
Okay, yeah.
But yeah, the things that I wanted to talk about, first and foremost, is that this game was developed by Inkle, who are the developers of Heaven's Vault, which we talked about late last year. And that's interesting to me. Inkle's also the development house behind 80 Days and other similar sort of very narrative-focused, pick a path kind of adventure games. And it's interesting to see this game, especially on PC, because I believe it was developed initially for phones with that sort of interface in mind. And it's interesting to see the game play out, and also knowing the developers' other games. There's definitely a through line here.
Yeah, especially what feels like it links this and Heaven's Vault, at least in my head, is the focus on language. It's much looser in this one, obviously, but spells are casts with different combinations of letters, and it's an astrological casting. The stars reveal the letters to you, and you have to channel them.
Yeah, you can only... Well, we'll get into that, because the magic system is probably the most interesting thing in the game.
Yeah.
But we have to credit a lot of that to Steve Jackson, which is the second thing that I wanted to bring up. Steve Jackson is, as we mentioned, quote unquote, we used in the intro bit there, the designer of games that you might know, like Munchkin and Sorcery. He wrote the original series of books for these, which play basically like a choose-your-own-adventure game.
Yeah, I was looking over the Wikipedia for this, and it seems like these gamified video game versions of those books, that part 1 is the closest to what the actual books are like, and then they get more, they take more liberties as they go. I think they tweaked the combat system and stuff to work more for a video game, but it sticks pretty close, yeah. And so what you get is, a choose-your-own-adventure, it's like a role-playing game where the campaign involves a lot of travel. You travel along a path, and then events happen.
Yeah, it's very similar if you've played other tabletop RPGs to having a game that has an encounter table involved, where somebody is rolling a die and giving you a random thing that happens to you, just given a certain amount of time or distance or whatever. Obviously, the game is not random, though. It follows a strict pattern, so you make choices, and you can actually rewind and go back and make different choices when you want to, which I think is sort of the gamification of the choose your own adventure book style, where you can just flip back in pages and choose different things however you want to.
Yeah, and I know these were written for like the Sorcery series or whatever you want to call it. It was written for the Fighting Fantasy series of role-playing books, which I know we get to squeeze in a Dark Souls reference here, or specifically something that Miyazaki credited as like an inspiration to him when it comes to like creating RPGs and stuff.
Yeah.
So I just wanted to throw that tidbit in there. But yeah, the rewind mechanic is, I think you nailed it there. Like, feels like it's coming from that choose your own adventure game book roots, because like I know from being a kid and like reading like Goosebumps choose your own adventure books in the library, like as soon as you get an ending you don't like, you go back and you're like, oh no, that didn't happen.
Exactly.
I made this choice instead, first try.
I don't think that I ever met like a kid who was so like adamant about doing it in one, being like, sorry, that's the end of the book that I got.
But it feels weird in a game though to me. Like I tried not to do it as much as possible.
Same.
And I wonder if that's how like the average person would take to that, or I don't know. Like it just feels like it doesn't quite click to me.
Well, let us know in the comments if that is the case for you. But my inclination is that most people probably would do essentially what I would have effectively done, especially going through the first part of it, where it is like, you don't do it because you're playing a video game, and in a video game you just kind of want to, you just do the thing that you do in a game. If you had prior experience with the books, I feel like you would be more likely to use the system.
Yeah.
But the game also does force you to use it if you die. And you can die a lot. In a lot of colorful ways.
Yeah, for me, on part one, I didn't die until the very end. I forgot that somebody had warned me about the flower field, and I went through it, and then you can't escape it, and you die. And I was like, oh, fuck. And then that was the first time I had died, and that's, like, right up at the end. So, like, yeah, like, I played through the whole first part not even thinking about it. Like, I forgot, or even, I don't even know if it tells you about the rewind mechanic. I don't remember. But, like, I completely forgot about it.
I think that it tutorializes it the first time that you die, because there's I remember seeing a screen that said, remember, no choice is final, that kind of a thing. But I don't remember when it came up.
Right.
I died actually in almost exactly the same point for the first time, where I was shot by lightning bolts from an old woman.
Oh, yeah.
So, yeah, which is just the other fork in that path. So we made it about the same amount of time before being murdered. So that's nice, I guess. But yeah, that's God, I guess that's that as far as that going over.
Yeah. I don't want to like criticize it or anything too much, because like it did seem like a unique challenge to like adapt a series of role playing books to a video game. Like I don't think I've ever seen that sort of thing done so like in this way. Usually you see things like something like Baldur's Gate, which is trying to like create a D&D experience in the Forgotten Realms, but it's like an RPG.
Right.
It's not like an abstracted tabletop thing.
Yeah. I actually, well, I mean, if talking specifically about the rewind mechanic, while I realize that there's sort of, you could butt up against something where if you're just struggling with a particular like train of thought that you want to experiment out, it might get a little bit tedious, where you're just kind of repeating the same conversation over and over again. But I actually really like it on the design side, because it gives the developers more of an opportunity to just put in things that are really lethal, that just kill you in one hit. And normally that would be pretty unfair if the game had like a traditional save system and, God forbid, lives. But the fact that you can rewind at any time means that you can do the funny thing, or the thing that's more interesting, and then when it backfires horribly in your face, you can rewind and go the other way.
Yeah, no, I agree. Like it felt a lot more like that shined when we played through the second part, and there were like a lot more. It was a lot longer and a lot harder.
Yes.
And so you got like, yeah, you stumble upon an encounter, some wild shit happens, and you're like, well, what else might happen? You know, like you get to the point where you just want to see what other weird shit there might be.
Yeah. Yeah, it's very amusing, especially considering like the idea that this is the story of like your character. Like if this was an actual, I mean, this feels like early D&D, like the first, second edition kind of D&D, where you would just fucking get caught in a trap and die and lose the character and have to start again. I want to call attention here, if we're more or less past this
Sure,
at this point,
yeah.
to something that I think would have made the system feel a little bit meatier, that I guess I understand the reasoning for, but don't love.
Sure.
And that is, they don't let you give your character a name. You just are the guy or the girl. You don't have like an input name function. And coming from a choose your own adventure game, like obviously the book can't glue your name into it, but it would make it feel a lot more personal when you get fried by an old lady than as it is now, where your sort of nameless, hapless body that you're inhabiting is fried by an old lady, or a tree lands on them, or whatever else. I don't know. I like that stuck out to me during the first part, and I never really got over it. Is it just me?
I don't think it's just you. That seems like a valid thing to bring up, but I can't say that I thought about it even once.
You never thought, like, when people are asking you, like, you know, what are you doing here? Who are you? And your answer is always like, I'm a traveler.
Right? No,
I'm
never.
A simple trader.
Never once thought about it, because I feel like in games, when you put in a name, it's never used anyway.
Yeah.
So,
but this would be an opportunity.
Yeah,
to
that's true.
Use
No,
it.
you're totally right. I just didn't even. It didn't even occur to me. But yeah, it does seem like another thing where it feels like it's sticking to the books.
Yeah, it hits the books.
Yeah. I want it done, and I want it done by the books. Said Steve Jackson.
Yeah, I'm demanding that Steve Jackson turn over his gun and his badge. Let's talk about the mechanics, because there are two of them, and I think we could get through them pretty fast. Basically, well, I guess there's three, because conversation counts in this particular instance. It counts a lot, actually.
Talking, fighting, and casting.
Exactly, the three R's
of adventure.
And we'll actually save talking for the last one, because I think it's going to be the meatiest.
Yeah.
Fighting is interesting. I don't know if I like it, though.
Yeah, it feels like it's missing a little something. I don't know what that is exactly, but like it can feel surprisingly engaging for what it is. Especially, you're reading along. There's little descriptions that you can sometimes glean information from about whether or not it's safe to attack. But yeah, it's a really simple, like, kind of wager system where if the enemy blocks, your attack will only do 1 damage. But if they attack at the same time as you and your attack overpowers them, you deal damage to them and you take none.
Right.
And vice versa for them attacking you. But it feels like, I don't know, like, it needed a little something extra. Like, all the combat encounters felt samey.
Yeah, I think that's the biggest problem, is that, like, it didn't feel like you were fighting against different monsters. It just felt like you were playing the same betting mini game over and over again.
Yeah.
And, like, obviously people like games where you wager and win, because, like, casinos are a thing. But, like, it seems like it gets old, and it gets old kind of fast, and I just wish that wasn't the case. I wish there was a wrinkle.
Yeah, it might be, like, slightly intentional that it's not as fleshed out, because I feel like it really kind of feels like the game doesn't want you to resort to combat as much as you can.
Right.
Because I genuinely think that either casting a spell or talking your way out of it is pretty much always more interesting.
Agreed, yeah.
So that might be part of it.
Yeah. And they put in a lot of work, obviously, to get the descriptions, like the attacks and the other stuff. Like, the description of the people's, like, state in between attacks. It really is well done, interesting, and I think more often than not, is, like, it's a cool thing for a combat system to fall back more on the description of the flavor of it than it is to just be like a 2D hit the sword button.
No, it fits really well for a narrative game to have the combat have narrative to it.
Yeah, it just doesn't really have legs, which is the problem.
Yeah.
Also, I didn't know, because in the first section you can meet this little, like, sprightly dude. Jan, who hangs out on your shoulder. I didn't know until much, much later in the game how good a fireball is. A fireball is a pretty good spell, as it turns out.
Yeah, I ended up not really casting almost any magic on the first part, because I stupidly, like, when you approach the gate to leave, like, the little tutorial village, it has you cast whatever the spell is to open the door.
Yeah. Dop.
Yeah. And for, like, door open, I guess.
Yeah.
But, yeah, like, it shows, like, how it displays, like, all the letters in the sky, and you have to, like, those are the only letters available, or D-O and P, and you pick them, and it opens the door, and I'm like, okay, so, like, that's how spellcasting works. So you have to have someone teach you the spell, and then it has, like, a little thing where you use it the first time and you unlock it. Even though they had just gone through a whole thing where they're like, here's a spell book full of spells.
With 48 spells in it.
I stupidly was just, like, had this idea in my head that, like, you had to have them taught to you. For no reason.
The first thing I did when I started the game was just read the whole spell book.
Yeah,
from cover to cover.
I somehow just completely forgot after it was handed to me.
Yeah, it's I don't know. It's a little strange, but I really like how it is implemented. I like the systems where it's like some spells are only available at certain times, and I didn't look enough into it to know if it's like time of day. This is like a limitation that can't really be done in paper from what I can tell, unless the books have like a incremental counter, and it's like you can only use spells when the dice are on 6 or whatever. But either way, I like that it was implemented the way that it was, and I like the fact that it just seems to give you lots of descriptions of stuff, and you just sort of have to work out how that could be useful to you.
Yeah, I feel like it's one of my favorite implementations of magic in a game, just pretty much ever. Because, like, there's nothing wrong with the way it's done in, like, RPGs necessarily, but, like, you do end up with a lot of samey stuff where, like, it's, like, projectiles and summons. And magic is magic. You know, it can be anything. So, like, I feel like there's room for more creative uses. Like, in something like Eternal Darkness, we talked about how, like, it was cool that it was, like, represented as, like, spells as, like, an ancient eldritch language, like, as, like, forgotten knowledge.
Yep.
And, like, that's really cool. And this does, like, a similar thing where it feels like something beyond your control, like you were saying. Like, you can only use spells at certain times of day, and it's not quite clear, like, exactly, like, what governs it or, like, how it works. Yeah, and you have to use your brain. You just have to, like, be like, what could I do here? I could grow big. Is that one available? Fuck yes. And then you grow huge. So, yeah, it's really cool. It makes it feel more mysterious and, you know, magical.
Yeah, it also is the thing that emulates magic in D&D better than any D&D game I've ever played, where you have spells that don't have a use in combat. You have spells that do things where maybe you could implement them in an unexpected way.
Yeah.
And a lot of the fun of playing a caster in a spell casting capable tabletop RPG is finding interesting ways to make the magic work when you can't come up with anything else. Like an interesting sort of like toolbox as opposed to just being like, yeah, projectiles and summons and shit.
Yeah, it's like that like quintessential like trying to describe what's cool about D&D to somebody's scenario when you're like, oh, we were fighting this boss and I noticed there were like stalactites in the cave and I shot a spell at those and it fell and killed the monster. You know, like that sort of scenario, like this game, it feels like it's like at the kernel of like what the magic in this game is getting at. Like there's a scenario we were like captured and we were in like the brig of a boat and we were trying to think of like what spells could help us get out, and like we were just talking through all these things, and like yeah, like it really feels like you have to like it emphasizes that non-combat based spells that you just kind of have to apply in a smart way, or in a let's just see what happens kind of way, you know, depending on how you're feeling, which is it's really cool. I've never really seen that done in another game before.
Yeah, and I like that it's tied to the stamina system as well, because basically, for those who haven't played the games, you have just a count of stamina, like an amount that you have.
Yeah, it's like health.
Yeah, and it acts as both your health and your spellcasting, and also like other things. They use the stamina predominantly for those two things, and then you can recover it by sleeping and eating, praying, drinking at a fountain.
Eat, pray, love.
Eat, pray, love. Any of the three core fundamental elements of life, eat, pray, or love, will restore your stamina.
I bet that having sex in this game would restore your stamina.
That's probably true. I believe that these games were made for children originally, so probably isn't there, but if it was, it would be in the thing.
Yeah.
But yeah, and that's sort of the thing. It's like you use the stamina system, and a lot of the time, engaging in combat is probably going to deal more damage to you than throwing a fireball at somebody. But I guess you do always have the option to go into combat if you think you're just going to ace it and not take any damage.
Yeah, so. And it lets you retry. Like it prompts you to do the combat again if you take damage.
Yeah, which I did several times in the first one, and noticed that wasn't a habit of yours.
No, I never once even thought about it.
I fought the assassin in the woods 4 times.
Oh, yeah.
Because I was like, no, I didn't do anywhere near good enough. It's a really dangerous system for somebody like me, because I start to imagine that I can just, like, perfect it and want to do it over and over again.
Like, I don't know. Like, I think kind of what I was trying to get at the beginning is I want to, like, have the adventure and, like, what happens. So, like, I tried not to rewind if I didn't have to.
Sure. I mean, I didn't know at the time like how many like limitations they were going to be, and like maybe being at a low stamina meant that I wouldn't be able to do some shit. But this game is not shy about just taking everything away from you, because it does happen a lot. I played through the first part of this game with 0 gold and 0 rations for the entirety, because I was captured immediately after leaving. And I went on and just, like, every town I came to, I had to sleep in the woods and whatever. And so you do have to rely on, like, combat skill and smart spellcasting in order to get through. I do wish that the rations did more and had more of a purpose, because I felt like they never really... Me not having rations for the whole first thing didn't really come up.
Yeah, you don't really have to eat if you keep your health or your stamina up. I don't know. I feel like there's probably long-term penalties for not eating, because like I went a while without eating in the middle of part 1, and it kept referencing it, like the fact that you were hungry, but it never actually ended up doing anything.
Right.
So I don't know about that, but no, yeah, I agree. Like they give you a spell called Doc, which is supposed to make the healing potions and maybe the rations too, I don't know, heal you for full. And that seems like but it never let us use that. Like, we kept trying to do it, and there was never an occasion where, like, the letters were available.
Right.
So, like, it seems like the rations do as much as they do because you get access to that spell, which can heal you, like, full, so they want to, like, balance it.
Mm-hmm.
But we couldn't ever figure out how to cast Dock, so, yeah, I do also wish that the rations did more for you.
Yeah, it seems a little odd. And, like, maybe it's a balancing thing where Dock is only available at certain times of day. You're most likely
probably
to be closer to full health near the morning, because normally you can find a place to sleep and it restores your stamina a little bit.
Yeah,
So,
and I think your god or your patron is more likely to give you healing in the morning.
I think it's just on a timer.
Oh yeah, I thought it was like you wake up and pray first thing in the morning kind of thing.
I mean, I suppose it could work out that way. I only prayed like twice when I was playing by myself, because to me it felt like it was a limited resource, and so I just didn't use it.
I never even thought about it like that.
Yeah, I was like, well, if I really need it for something later, then I'll save it for that. And so, I don't know. And I didn't have much trouble. I think the only thing that really killed me was that old lady and her dumb lightning bolts.
Yeah, the only thing that I kept checking it all the time because I feel like that is an underdeveloped mechanic. Like, I was always really intrigued by that. Like your god up there, your deity in the corner, and it will change. I think it's depending on like what you do or how you act. I just thought that was really interesting, and was always waiting for it to do more. So I would hope that it does more in future parts in first 2 or 3 and 4. But who knows? Yeah. Like, it does. You'll get into certain scenarios where like you can pray to your deity to like save your ass. Like when we were in the sewers and they were flooding. Yeah, we prayed to the dolphin god. So yeah, they do some unique things sometimes, but it always seemed like there was potential for more with that I was curious about.
Yeah, it was always interesting when it came up as an option for something to do, because it felt like it was doing something other than just healing you and then going away for a while. So
yeah,
I appreciate the existence of it. I wish that some of the things were more signaled, and I kind of wish that some of the stuff was a little bit more unique, I guess.
Yeah,
like where it mattered what your deity was. Where it never really seemed to.
Yeah, signaling is one of those things in this game where, like, I think with the magic, it enhances it and makes it cooler. That it doesn't spell out for you, like, when spells are useful and when they're not.
Spell out.
Spell out for you, yes. But yeah, there are other mechanics it does feel like it's the hindrance, where it's not clear, like, when you can do certain things or when it's advantageous or available to do other things, so...
Yeah, and I mean, the reality of the situation is that the game is a little bit more on rails than it leads on. Specifically in the case of your, like, actual choice of actions. Like, when you go from part 1 to part 2, you see it open up a whole lot, and you have a lot more options and a lot more things you can do. But in each of those discrete encounters, there's really only like a good and bad option. And I've heard that you can change what options you're given based on what like whether you lean good or evil as well. So that's a lot of options to write a whole thing for, but the game presents itself in a way that feels more open than it actually is.
Yeah, there's a lot of scenarios and less actual like branching paths for like the narrative to ultimately go.
Yeah. Like we stole that boat and took 4 different options, and all 4 of them put us in the water.
Yeah.
So.
Like, no matter what you do, you're going to end up at the North Gate.
Mm-hmm. And whether or not you know the fucking things. Let's talk about the story, but we'll also sort of mash into the dialogue system, because I think they're sort of intrinsically bound. The way that you play the game, for the most part, unless you are forced to fight something, which is rare, is by just selecting dialogue options, and it has pretty much all of the same problems that dialogue systems in adventure games always do, where you don't have as many options as you think, and sometimes the options are taken differently than you expect them to be.
Yeah, I found like myself not really feeling that way as much as in other games in this for me, like where you say a thing and you're like, that's not what I thought that meant.
Oh yeah, that part is definitely less.
Yeah, like there it did happen quite a bit where I'm like, I don't like any of these options.
Mm-hmm.
But I found myself not caring as much in this because I feel like because it's so, I don't know if I would say silly, but it's very like, there's a certain tone to it, it's a very like, God, I don't know what word to use.
I mean, it does sort of hit the D&D tone where let's say you crack open Lost Mines of Phandelver and are just running through it with people, right? Like, it's just a pre-made campaign or whatever. And so you have subject matter that takes itself seriously, being played by people who are modern people and not dwarves, and therefore will just joke about it. And so the game hits this balance of feeling like you can do the thing that maybe you as a player would want to do, even if there was no way that, like, the actual guy who would have been here in this story would do it. It, like, leaves it open for that video game silliness.
Yeah, I think a good way to put it is it gives me a feeling of, like, really good children's fiction, where it is respecting the kid's intelligence and, like, providing them with, like, a good story, but it's also, like, incorporating this kind of, like, childlike wonderment to it. I think that's a good way of putting it. There's, like, a particular tone to it that I just really like. And I don't remember why I started saying that. Oh, because of the dialogue options.
Yeah.
Long tangent there. But, yeah, like, I just found myself, like, if there was something that, like, I didn't really like the outcome of, like, it felt like it didn't matter as much.
Sure. Unless it killed you with a lightning
right
bolt.
But even then, that, like, those are usually, like, humorous or something.
Yeah.
Or interesting.
I for sure loved dying in this game. It was always fun to read.
Like, dying in that field of flowers was, like, a very, like, weird and cool way to die.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's, like, it's cool to read all the death scenes, so you don't really mind, I guess.
But yeah, so that's that, I guess. The narrative that the game actually puts you through is very nebulous. It kind of, like, gives you this little teaser at the beginning that's a dream. It's like a recurring thing in the game that your character will dream about things, and I'm sure that it's in some way telling you how you're doing.
Yeah.
But I didn't really get any of it from it necessarily. But as you go through it, like, you have basically a really simple quest that is like, go here, get a thing, bring it back. And
the Crown of Kings.
The Crown of Kings, you have to go get it. The
classic MacGuffin.
Yeah, magical rock item. But along the way, you sort of just have these really insular goals where you're like, I need to get from here to this city, and then the game just continually puts up a thing in front of you and says, like, but what about this? Have you thought about it? Have you done any of these things? Go fight a troll in a cave. And so you do, and you fight the troll in the cave. So the overall narrative is so very minor, and then characters will ask you about it, and you pretty much have no reason to ever tell them that it's what you're doing.
Yeah.
And not really any indication whether it's going to mean anything to them at all in the first place. So it's interesting that, like, while it is based on a book, technically speaking, it is a game that's actually not as narratively focused as you might expect it to be.
No, it's very much like a road trip story. It's about the journey. And yeah, you're like a classic wanderer. Like, things just happen to you along the way, and that's like where the fun is, where the meat and potatoes are.
Yeah, this is like the Harold and Kumar go to White Castle of video games.
Yep.
Yep, that's the one. I don't want to. I actually kind of don't want to. Spoil isn't the word here. Like, go over the actual narratives of each of the parts. Yeah, I'd rather sort of just. Did you enjoy what the game put you through? I guess.
Yeah, I did. I think it's a little bit of a mixed bag, but it leans positive, I think.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, like I think the first part, I think even at the time, but especially in retrospect, felt a little bit too simple. I liked the second part more because it put you through this like town of pirates and thieves and stuff. So everything felt like. It felt really immersive. Like you have to like consider each move you make a lot. Like I think it made the mechanics shine better. Like it felt like there was always important decisions to make, and we ended up with like lower health and money, and then that always made everything seem more imposing as well, and like every decision feel all the more important. Yeah, and I do like if you're asking more narrative, I guess. Yeah, like I think. Once again, the denser city made for like more encounters and like more characters in more like interesting and weird scenarios. So
yeah, I don't know, actually. I feel like I agree that the first part feels a little bit too simple in retrospect, but at the time it felt sort of like what I wanted from the game.
I mean, I didn't dislike it.
Right. Well, I think that in the end, I end up liking it a little bit more than the second part, and it's just because the second part is more mentally taxing.
Sure. I think I might have lucked into having a really easy time with the first part. Like, I feel like I avoided a lot of conflict.
I suppose. I
did not get robbed. And had like 20-some gold and 20-some stamina when I finished.
Right, yeah, none of that for me. I also didn't have a broadsword, which you
right,
did
yeah,
have. Yeah. But either way, I basically came out of it a pauper. But at the same time, like, it felt more leisurely. It felt like I was having a lot more fun. Whereas in the second half, or the second part, rather, it feels like it's just adversity on every corner.
Yeah, it definitely was getting taxing by the end. Like I feel like a middle ground, a theoretical Sorcery 1.5,
right.
Where it was a little bit more dense than the first part and less than the second would probably be a sweet spot.
Yeah, I would agree with that. It felt like the first part was playing Dungeons and Dragons, the game where you walk around and do stuff, and then playing the second part was like being in a dungeon.
Yeah,
like you actually have to be worried about stuff at all times.
Yeah, and in played back to back, they do kind of complement each other a little bit.
Sure,
in that way,
which I guess is why they bundle it together.
Yeah, for sure.
Well, and also because the first game takes like 2 hours to get through, so.
But then you get to and I'll avoid specifics, but you get to the end of part 2, and it does this thing, which I mean, plenty of other games have done stuff like this, where like you feel like you got up to the end, and then the game comes in and slaps your wrist and says, not really, go back and do all this other stuff.
Right.
And I feel like I really didn't like that, because like I said, like it made it really feel like it seemed like we had made it through and that we were done, and then told us to turn around. And I guess it's less of a criticism of this game, although I guess it still is a criticism of the game, and more of a criticism of this kind of trope.
Yeah.
That I want to say that I don't like.
Yeah, and in addition to that, like, this would be okay if we got to the end of it in 2 hours, like the first
like
half.
the first part. I would have been way more willing to go back through the countryside.
Yeah, but it felt like you had played the whole game at that point.
Yeah, it felt like you got through the gauntlet, and then they were like,
go back.
There's another third of the gauntlet left.
And then to make matters worse, literally the reason that, or the way that the game delivers this information to you is with a ghost of a character you don't know just appearing out of nowhere.
Yeah, like if they had like introduced that ghost like halfway in and been like, you're gonna have to do this
Right.
before you can leave, then that would have been better.
Yeah, it would have saved it a lot.
Yeah.
Because then you would have been more inclined to go do other stuff before going toward the gate at the end.
Yeah, and maybe we missed. I'm sure we missed some stuff, but if there would have been like more places, like more inns to like stop and sleep, because like the whole second half of part 2, we were like below 10 stamina.
Yeah. And then at other times forced to 1 stamina. It was like a really. It wasn't yo-yoing. It was like the yo-yo where the string kind of gets tangled up in the gear of it, and you try and pull it back up. It just sort of bounces at the bottom. That's where we were. They were walking the dog with us.
Yeah.
This extended yo-yo metaphor is unnecessary. But yeah, it didn't feel like it was the time to go back and do the whole fucking game again.
To its credit, it does just let you say no and turn around and leave. But I guarantee you the better outcome is if you go back and help.
Oh yeah, and fucking
like, it would be really cool though, like if later in the game you had to quest back and you had to go through Goblin Town.
Right.
And there's like consequence to that. That would be actually pretty cool. But it made us. It kind of ends it on a sour note, I think.
I agree, and the balls to put it right at the end of the 2-pack as well.
Yeah.
Like if you end up at the end of the game not doing the thing and being cursed, and then they're like, by part 3. You'll have a lot of fun taking your cursed character through part 3. It feels like it would discourage me from wanting to go through the next part of the game.
Honestly, it almost kind of makes me more curious, but I don't disagree. It is also discouraging.
Yeah.
It's seesawing for me back and forth.
Do you have anything else?
It's probably a good place to wrap it up.
I do want to shout out, I guess, I said the words that we should end the podcast, but then I was like, no, hold on. I want to shout out the visual, the actual like hand-drawn style
Good
of this.
Good call.
Super good. Fits perfectly with the setting.
Yeah, and we mentioned it's simulating like a tabletop thing, and it does have that look of like a tabletop map. Yeah, and it's very cool. And you move your little piece, who looks like a game piece, around the board, and the way he's animated to like slide around it. It all adds to that feeling, and yeah, it does look great. And I particularly love you every once in a while you get a little illustration card.
Yes,
which is great. I wish there were a few more of those.
Yeah, that shit is my lifeblood.
Oh, yeah.
I love those illustrations.
They're very cool. I feel like a particular illustrator is coming to mind, but I can't place it. But it almost has like a little bit of like a Shel Silverstein look. Like it's very much a lot of hatching, and like caricature, or like very like scraggly looking people, and like with those kinds of like ragged details.
Yeah,
that just look very cool.
All of the drawings are really dense.
Yeah,
and like dark. It's great. It's really really good. And then to add to the like tabletop aesthetic that I love, when you go into like an area that has a sub-map, it like pulls it up and lays it on top of the map.
It's laid on top of the map. Yep.
Oh, it's super good.
Great detail.
Yeah. So they did an excellent job with presentation here. And the music is so generic and quiet that it is like somebody playing it on their phone while they're DMing you.
Legitimately think that's what it's going for. Like it's just supposed to be like a backing thing. And like you can turn it off as well if you don't want to have it.
But I think that probably comes from this being a phone game first.
Yeah.
They don't put that much effort into the sound a lot of the time because most people don't have it on. But yeah, do we have fighting fantasy thoughts?
My fighting fantasy thoughts are This game is very, very interesting. It's a perfect pocket game. I think Inkle is becoming another one of those NoClip pocket developers that I'm definitely going to like keep tabs on anything new they might put out. Yeah, like it really does a great job of emulating the tabletop feeling. Like if you were someone younger and you didn't have anybody to play D&D with, this is a great thing to play. Like if you're thinking about getting into DMing, this is a great thing to play because there's so many little encounters that you could use as inspiration. It's like a jumping off point, especially if you want to do a campaign with a lot of travel in it. So yeah, it's a great illustration of like that kind of craft of like creating a role-playing experience, like that scenario writing. Yeah, I mean, it's definitely got some kinks. Like the implementation of the combat isn't the best thing. Like the transition from a role-playing book to a game isn't the most graceful, but I think they mostly stick to landing. Like this is very fun to play. I imagine it brings the books to life very effectively. I think the crowning jewel of it is the magic system. It's very, very cool, like using the 3-letter words to cast all the different spells. It's very mysterious. Can you only do some certain times a day, et cetera, et cetera. All very interesting, and captures that out of combat magic usage that apparently we oh so crave. We're big fans of that. I guess I'll end it here because I feel like I'm being rambly. Like very cool and interesting little gem from Inkle here again.
Yeah, I mean, you could have gone on for longer because I don't have basically anything to say. What this game does really well is emulate its source material. It has the writing, which is taken largely from the books and then spun off and done in different ways as the series goes on, is really close to that, like, YA or children's fantasy literature that a lot of people grew up with, and that has a sort of, like, charm to it. It's a certain style that is really enjoyable to go back to because it feels like this intersection of quaint and creative in a way that I am always, I guess, intrigued by it.
Yeah, that's a really good way to put it. It has that indie game charm like that.
Yeah. And otherwise, I mostly agree with you. I think the magic system is really inventive, and I know it also comes from the original books, but they've put a more systems-driven spin on it that I think is very cool. And would love to continue using it in other, like, see similar things done in other areas. But yeah, everything else was very middling for me. I felt like overall, like, I didn't love this, but also when I sat down to play it, I did just, like, bust right through it in one sitting. And it didn't feel like it was taking a long time. It drug in the second act a bit, but for the most part, I think that this is especially as a short experience, I think they did a really good job of adapting the source material and making it something fun to play.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you for listening to NoClip Pocket this week.
What are we talking about next time?
Next time, we're going to be talking about Limbo, which is a game that you play by taking a bar and putting it on two... It's just not no laughs at all from there. You bend real low, you walk underneath the bar. That's how it works. This is the first game by Playdead. It was we had talked about Inside. I don't know, a million years ago.
A few years ago, 3 years maybe,
something like that. And it was actually one of the earliest episodes. Or I think it was the last episode before we moved into our current recording setup.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, it's a game that I really loved, and I probably only played Inside for the first time because I really liked Limbo when I played it. So
yeah, it's a very like early indie platformer that I think got notoriety because of its visual style, the silhouetted look.
And a lot like Psychonauts, if you've never played Limbo, just check your like accounts and stuff because it's just been like free or like 3 cents multiple times in the like 8 years since it came out. So like you may just have a copy of it. Totally possible.
Yeah, look forward to playing it again.
Yep. And until that time, you can get a hold of us. All of our contact information is on our website at noclippodcast.com. There you can find our email address, our Twitter account, link to our Discord where we talk about the games. You can find our YouTube channel. And both on the website and on YouTube, you can see all of our old episodes, including that one I just mentioned on Inside. Yes, that is the correct name of that game. Mm-hmm. And you can also listen to the episode that we did on Inkle's game, Heaven's Vault. Did we do anything that was Dungeons and Dragons like?
Divinity Original Sin 2.
There it is. Yes, you can also check out Divinity 2.
Cast like.
L-I-K.
On that like button. Cast sub to subscribe.
Have you considered casting BEL so that you get notified of our new videos?
Cast COM to leave a comment in the comment section.
All the comments better be written in just 3-letter pairs.
I'm recording Foley for me ripping something out of my notes and handing it to you. What do you think that sounds realistic?
Yeah, it's almost it. How'd you make that noise?
I ripped some paper out of my notebook.
Wow.
And handed it to you.
It's amazing what you can do with technology these days.
I know, right?